Want to know more about the new Oculus Quest? Then this episode is for you, so let's get to it. You are listening to the How to Create VR podcast, weekly conversations with VR and AR professional creators, designers, and producers. Hello and welcome to another episode of the How to Create VR podcast, where I speak with professional creators, designers, developers, and producers who work on VR, AR, and MR projects. I'm Marcelo Lewin, an immersive technologies evangelist, creator, producer, and the guy behind howtocreatevr.com. Today, I have no special guests. It's just me talking to you all about the Oculus Quest and how I think it will affect the future of VR. A lot of the information I'm going to provide to you, I got while attending Oculus Connect 5. I also did a lot of post-reading in various blogs, listened to other podcasts, and rewatched some of the Oculus Connect 5 keynotes and sessions. If you didn't get a chance to attend Oculus Connect 5, I highly recommend you watch all the sessions and keynotes. They're all available on the Oculus YouTube channel. I will post a link directly to that channel in the show notes. You can also listen to my previous episode of this podcast where I interview 7 VR creators at Oculus Connect 5. I will also put a link to that in the show notes. Before we begin, I would like to thank my good friends at VR for sponsoring this episode. Thanks to their support, I'm able to continue to create great content to share with you. VR allows you to easily share your 360-degree photos and videos with the entire world. Plus, they now have a VR experience that lets you build 360-degree tours easily. You can access VR through the web, mobile, and all major VR platforms. You can check them out at howtocreatevr.com/VRVR. Make sure you use this URL so that they know I sent you there. Alright, with that said, let's get started. So what is the Oculus Quest? It's a new breed of standalone HMDs, or head-mounted displays, that allows you to get into VR easily. The first one that was out by Oculus was obviously the Oculus Go. The Quest is basically a device-free, meaning you don't need a phone, you don't need a computer. Also, it's untethered, so there are absolutely no cables whatsoever. The key here, because there are other devices like the Oculus Go or the Vive Focus or the Lenovo Mirage, the big difference with the Quest is that it's 6 degrees of freedom and also has hand presence, meaning that you can move your hands and it will track your hands just like it does with the Oculus Rift. And with the 6 degrees of freedom, you can now not just look all around like you do with the Oculus Go, but you can actually move. You can move up, you can move down, you can move right, you can move left. You have full, complete freedom, but also the hand presence, that's the key here, is that it can track both touches, which are the controls that it come with, in full 6 degrees of freedom. So that's the big difference now with this one. They said that it gives you Rift quality experiences. I'm going to tell you in a minute what that really means, because I've tried the Oculus Quest at Oculus Connect in 2 experiences, and I'll go into that in just a minute. It also has inside-out tracking. So the Oculus Rift has outside-in tracking. Same with the, for example, HTC Vive or Vive Pro. They have outside-in, meaning that you have cameras or some sort of tracking device that it's outside of the HMD. With the Oculus Quest, all the cameras are built into the HMD itself, so it's inside-out tracking. They have 4 cameras, and they call these 4 cameras, or sensors, they call them Insight, Oculus Insight, and I'm going to go into that in just a minute. It also comes with a built-in audio system, just like it does with the Oculus Go, so you don't need to put a headphone set. It does have the ability to plug in a headphone set, but you don't need to. The optics or the lenses are just like the Oculus Go. That means that it's actually better than the Rift. I have both the Oculus Go and the Rift, and the optics on the Go are much, much better. It's interesting because I didn't notice how much better they are on the Go than the Rift until I went back to the Rift and noticed like it wasn't as clear as my Oculus Go. So I'm glad that the optics that they use are from the Go on the new Oculus Quest. It does come, like I mentioned, with 2 touch controllers, just like you have with the Rift, except the rings are pointing up versus pointing down, and I'll explain in just a minute why. Also, it has what they call arena scale or beyond room scale experience. They actually had an amazing experience, dead and buried over there, which was arena size, and you had complete freedom. The entire arena was available for you to run around and not worry about losing track. The HMD won't be released until 2019. It was announced at Oculus Connect, but it will not be released until 2019. The real big news, and when everybody really went crazy, including me, I mean, it was expected that they were going to announce what was previously Project Santa Cruz, they were going to announce the Oculus Quest. Nobody knew what the name was going to be, but it was pretty much a known fact that it's going to come out during Oculus Connect. But the big news, and what we were all talking prior to the event, was the price. I was convinced that it was going to be between $400 to $600, somewhere in that range. I was sitting with a guy, and he was saying between $300 or $400, and I was saying, no way they can do this. Well, he nailed it. It's $399. And that's huge news because $399 is a fantastic price point, especially for what you're getting. You're getting the Oculus Rift, basically, right? Not all that power, but you're still getting the Oculus Rift functionality in a standalone untethered device. That's huge. And I'm going to talk in a minute why that's huge. And specifically, as you guys know, I'm really interested in the enterprise. Why is that huge for the enterprise? Like I mentioned before, I was able to try the Oculus Quest. I waited in line probably for about 40 minutes. During line, I actually got to interview some people for that podcast. And that was, like I mentioned at the beginning, that's available, episode number 33. So check it out and you'll hear that interview while I was waiting in line. But I was waiting in line to try a couple of experiences. They had the Dead and Buried. That was the arena one that I was not able to attend because it was all booked. But I was able to do Super Hot VR and then Face Your Fears 2. With a Super Hot VR, originally I told people the experience was very similar to Rift, but then I backtracked and said, actually, it's better than the Rift, and I'll explain why. Graphic-wise, we all know Super Hot VR graphics are not that hard to create on any device. They're pretty minimal. They're simple graphics, so I pretty much knew that it wasn't going to be, from a graphics perspective, that much different on the Quest. But what I loved the most was the complete freedom to walk around everywhere. In the Rift experience, because I'm tethered, and when the glass dudes that attack you, you end up moving your hand to get them to come towards you, right? Because you've got to wait for them to come close enough where you can punch them. I was doing that at the beginning with the Quest, but then I realized, wait a minute, I'm untethered, I have a big room here. Why do I have to do that? Why don't I just walk towards them? And I started doing that, so I no longer had to wait for them to come towards me. Even if they were far, I walked towards them and I punched them or shot them, whatever the case was. Well, that gave me this new freedom of walking anywhere. Of course, you have to be careful that you don't run into walls, and you have to set up, obviously, your guardian system correctly. But regardless, that gave me this brand new freedom of being really in the environment. And if my enemy is far from me, I don't have to wait for them to come towards me. I can go towards them. And that feeling was just amazing. And once I figured that out, I was just going everywhere. I felt bad for the person that was making sure that I was not crashing to the walls, because she was probably running behind me, making sure that I didn't run into things. But I was pretty careful. So from that perspective, it was just amazing. The touch controls were a little bit confusing. They have all the same buttons and the joysticks, so all that was fine. But what was a little confusing is because the rings are now at the top, because the rings are used to track your hands, then it was a little bit hard to figure out how to position them at my hand. But once I did that, no big deal. The device itself wasn't that heavy. Once I'll get it here, I'll see how it compares to the Go and or the Rift. But it just felt like it wasn't heavy at all. One thing I did notice is it has a little light leak underneath the nose, just like the Oculus Go does. Some people like that because they feel claustrophobic. I don't like that. Once I'm in VR, I want to be completely sealed. And this is the same issue that the Oculus Go has. There's a little leak underneath the nose, which is okay at times. If you just want to look, you can raise your head and look down, and then you can see, like if you want to grab a cup of water or whatever, that's kind of cool. But honestly, I would have preferred it to be tightly sealed, just like the Rift does. Once you put it on, you're in complete darkness. I love that. The device felt like it was ready now. Like I said, when I tried it both on the Super Hot VR, and then I tried it on the Face Your Fears 2, which is a great experience to try it on. It felt like it's ready, and it made me wonder, well, if it's ready now, why are we waiting till spring 2019 to release this? My only thought, nobody confirmed this, but my thought is that they want to release it with the 50 titles that they announced, and those titles are not ready yet. So speaking of those titles, they didn't announce every title that's going to be released with it, but they did say a couple of them, like Robo Recall, The Climb, Moss, and the big one, which we all got a peek of it, but really that teaser that they showed us didn't show much, is Vader Immortal. And that's going to be a big title on the Quest. Well, it's going to help the sales of the Oculus Quest. So let's talk about the specs. They didn't give many specs at the event. I read other articles and blog postings where they talked a little bit more about the specs, but really there's not much out there. One of the things they mentioned was that there's going to have active cooling. The Oculus Go is passive cooling. It has this plate that makes the heat escape from the front through that plate. With the Oculus Quest, the cooling will be active and will have a fan inside. And the reason is because it uses the Snapdragon 835 and they want to keep that running efficiently. So they need the fan to cool it. Speaking of the Snapdragon 835, that's the chipset they're using. Some people were hoping for the 845, which is the newest version of that chipset. That one is used on the Samsung S9. The 835 is used on the Samsung S8. Regardless, one of the things that one of the blog articles that I read pointed out, which made sense, is that even though it's an older chipset, it's fully focused on VR and nothing else, right? So it's not focused on answering phone calls, on messaging. It's just focused on VR. So it should still perform pretty well. For the battery life, they said it was going to be dependent on the content that it's running, right? An experience that is more graphic heavy, it's obviously going to take more battery life than one that is very passive with less interactivity and lower in graphics. But they never mention if it's going to last 2-3 hours. We'll see what happens when it hits the market and people are using it and the real life situations take into effect. We'll see how that works. They are offering a USB-C port for charging. We'll see if that supports fast charging. Hopefully it does. Maybe even that port, you'll be able to plug in, let's say, an external battery pack. These are questions still that we're not sure about. They did mention that it's going to have 64 gigabytes of standard model, which is different than the Oculus Go that starts at 32 gigabytes. But it makes sense because experiences are going to be much more robust and they're going to need more internal storage. I'm hoping that they offer a 128 or even 256 gigabyte model. I'm assuming they're not going to offer an external SD card, just like they didn't with the Oculus Go. From a display perspective, it is a twin OLED display. The resolution is 1440 by 1600 per eye with a 7200 Hertz refresh rate. So that should give you some pretty nice crisp graphics. Obviously, we're not talking about 4K displays yet, but who knows, maybe in the future. So why was I excited about the Quest and why is the Quest so important? I think the Quest really is the future of VR. From an enterprise perspective, this is a no-brainer. It's $399. People are going to start creating enterprise apps. From a training perspective, this opens up full 6 degrees of freedom to allow all sorts of training. Obviously, from a gaming perspective, this is also a no-brainer. You're untethered. You don't need a device. And the price point is the key here. It's $399. So the way Oculus mentioned they were positioning this is an 80-20 gaming/media. They're positioning the Oculus Go as an 80-20 but media/gaming. So meaning that people will consume media more than play games. Whereas with the Quest, they're making it more of a gaming console. So that also begs another question in my mind, because they position this in a lot of their marketing as an all-in-one system. Well, that sounds a lot like a gaming console now. So is the Oculus Quest a VR headset or is it a gaming console? And does that mean that Oculus is now competing with Xbox and the PlayStation? And if so, what is Xbox and PlayStation going to do? How are they going to react to this? Because the PlayStation, you are tethered still. You have the camera still. What are they going to do next? Are they going to come out with a standalone as well? Is Microsoft waiting to release anything VR related for the Xbox when it can be a standalone device? Who knows? But it's interesting how Oculus is now really, if you think about it, competing against gaming consoles with this new device. So the next thing in my mind is, where does Go and the Rift come into place now that the Quest is here? Why have a Go that's 3 degrees of freedom? I mean, really, who wants 3 degrees of freedom? I think in my mind, 3 DoF is pretty much dead, right? 6 DoF is the wave of the future. So does that mean that the Oculus Go will offer 6 DoF in the future? I personally think that that's what they're going to do. They're going to keep the Oculus Go as a sort of entry-level VR headset at $199, but in the future, they're going to figure out how to bring in 6 degrees of freedom into it, because really 3 degrees of freedom is very, very limited. It's a cool way to get people into VR now, but it doesn't give you the true VR experience that a Rift does or pretty soon the Quest does. So the Go, even though it's really geared towards watching media, I think they're going to hopefully introduce 6 degrees of freedom, but maybe it won't be as robust as the Quest with 4 cameras. They'll figure out how to use 2 cameras to be able to track 6 degrees of freedom. We'll see how it goes. Well, then that begs the question again, what happens to the Rift now? If the Quest is standalone and it gives you quote-unquote Rift-like experiences, which it doesn't really yet, but it will, Oculus is positioning the Rift as sort of their super high-end where they're going to be testing out all sorts of experiences and pushing the limits. Okay, that's cool. But then really the Oculus Quest has most of the functionality and tracking capabilities of the Rift. So why not through that USB-C port? Why don't you let me plug it into my computer, allow the GPU in my computer to take over, and then let me run Rift experiences through the Oculus Quest? That's something that I think many people are going to be asking is like, why are you making me buy an Oculus Rift when I have a Quest and a USB-C port in it? Let me plug it in. Of course, the Oculus Rift has the external tracking, right, with the cameras and full 360-degree tracking. So that may be a reason why you still need the Rift. But I think it's going to create confusion in the market because think about it. The Oculus Go is at $199. The Oculus Quest will start at $399. The Oculus Rift starts at $349. That's going to confuse people. But the true price of a Rift is not really $349 because you do need a computer to run it. And you need a pretty hefty computer with really at least to run it full capabilities a GTX 1080. You can run it at 1070, even at 1060, but highly recommend it on 1080. So really the cost of a Rift isn't $349. It's closer to $2,000 when you take into account the beefy computer you need. But from a marketing perspective, people are going to look at these 3 models and go like, well, I get the $199 entry level. I get the $399 Quest. So why don't I just buy the Rift for $349? Well, they'll buy that. They'll go home, plug it into their computer that is very low power, and they'll realize, oh, I can't run this. So I think Oculus is going to have to figure out some sort of messaging that really doesn't create confusion in the market. This also brings up another question. How will HTC respond to this? HTC has the Focus, which is a standalone 6 degrees of freedom, but only in the headset, not in the controls. I believe they may be coming out with one of the controls that's 6 degrees of freedom, but still only one control, not 2 controls. So I don't believe the Focus is really the competition to the Quest. So what will HTC do? What is the focus of HTC? If Oculus is really focusing on the consumer market, then what happens to HTC? They keep saying that they're focusing on the enterprise, but they keep selling it to gamers. The HTC Vive Pro is a $1,500 device. When you add a high-end computer, it's a lot more. And one of the benefits up until now was full room scale with the HTC Vive and the Pro. Well, the Quest now is $399 and offers arena size tracking. And that's something that, of course, the enterprise wants. So when the enterprise starts creating VR apps and they're looking at room scale or arena scale tracking, why will they choose HTC Vive or Vive Pro versus the Oculus Quest? I'm not saying the Vive or Vive Pro aren't good. They're excellent. But these are questions that you're going to hear from VPs and people in organizations in the enterprise asking, well, why am I going to spend $3,000 when you put everything together versus $400? These are questions that HTC really need to think about, and they need to start addressing and really need to start focusing on the enterprise market and why they are above Oculus when it comes to what they offer. If they don't really start figuring out their marketing message and why companies need to go to Vive or Vive Pro versus the $399 Oculus Quest, they're going to be in trouble. So we'll see how HTC responds. Overall, I think the Quest is great for virtual reality in the industry in general. I think in the short term, it will help HTC as well because it's going to bring more interest into virtual reality as a whole. But again, I think HTC really has to step back, have a very important meeting with all of their VPs and the people making the decisions there and figure out, okay, where do we move forward from here? All right, enough about that. Let's talk a little about Oculus Insight. Oculus Insight is basically what Oculus calls their tracking system. It's got 4 sensors, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom in each corner of the HMD. This is what's called inside-out tracking because it's on the HMD and it's pointing outside as opposed to outside-in tracking, where you have cameras outside tracking the user. They are wide-angle sensors, and these sensors are looking for edges, corners, and any distinct feature in the environment. It will then build a three-dimensional map, and then it combines this map with the gyroscope and accelerometer inputs. And this is how it estimates your head position and where your controllers are every millisecond. It does rely on distinct features of the environment. For example, the floor, the ceiling, walls, rugs, art, windows, anything in the environment. It relies on those distinct features to figure out where you are at and where your hands are at. It does also support multi-room guardian. Guardian is when you define your edges of your room so you don't run into walls. And what happens inside of the experience, when you get close to that wall, that real wall outside, you'll get this virtual wall that comes up and tells you, hey, you're too close, you might want to back up. The cool thing about the multi-room Guardian is it will remember the Guardian setup for each of the places that you set up for. So that means that I can have 2 or 3 rooms, set up my multi-Guardian, and then as I move around, it will know my Guardian system. It will automatically understand what the Guardian system is in each of these rooms. That is super cool. There are some limitations to the Oculus Insight. For example, because there are 4 cameras and they're all in front, it does operate as a dome. Each camera will cover a huge dome around you, but it only covers where you're looking at. So for example, if you position yourself in a T format and you have, let's say, the Oculus Touch 1 in each hand, and you're shooting at people right and left, but then you turn to your right and you're looking at people on the right in VR, and you start shooting, all of a sudden your left hand is now gone. It's no longer tracked because the 4 cameras are all looking to your right and they can't see anything on the left. The other issue is tracking behind because your 4 sensors are faced forward. It can't track behind you. And that's a problem. I know it will have some sort of tracking estimation that once you go beyond the tracking capabilities of the camera, it'll try to figure out where you're at. But again, that's not going to be extremely precise. Hopefully in the future, they add cameras in the back, so then it doesn't matter where you're looking or where your hands are, it will be able to track all of that. The other thing is you've got 2 big rings on the Oculus Touch that come with the Quest. These rings are used for the sensors to also track your hand position. If somehow you flip him upside down or you do something where you occlude the rings, then it will lose track of your hands. So all these things are limitations. I didn't get a chance to try all of these limitations to see what happens during the experience because the experience was very limited at Oculus Connect, and time-wise, that obviously had a lot of people that wanted to try it. But of course, we'll be trying this once it's released and people are buying it. I'm definitely going to try all sorts of things. All right, so what about developing apps for the Oculus Quest? There's not much released from a development perspective. There were a couple of classes at the Oculus Connect that I attended, and I'm going to go through some of the notes that I took there. But they said that you can start creating Rift apps and that they can, quote unquote, easily be ported into the Quest. Of course, exactly what it takes to do that, we don't know yet. They have ported, obviously, a couple of the apps like Superhot VR, which I mentioned before. I tried over there. But how long does it really take and how hard is it? There's not much out there to say that. They also mentioned that you'll be able to create Quest apps and then easily upgrade them to the Rift because it uses basically the same SDK and the API as the Oculus Rift. So that is a nice thing for people that are going to be creating apps that want to target both the Quest and the Rift. They did mention during the classes that when you are porting your app or creating apps for the Quest, there are some things you need to understand and be careful about. For example, creating experiences that require you to go behind a person's back to do something, for example, reaching a weapon, you're going to lose tracking. So you want to make sure you minimize that or not even do that on a Quest experience. Also, like I mentioned before, tracking only happens where you're looking. So again, if you're making a person look to the right and you want to start shooting at somebody, your left hand will be gone if it's pointing completely the opposite way, like in a T position. The nice thing is the touch controllers have the same button layout, so you shouldn't have an issue whether it's an Oculus Rift or it's an Oculus Connect app. The touch controllers, as mentioned before, have rings above. So again, you want to be careful what kind of movements you make the user do in the experience. So if they flip the trackers upside down because the rings may be occluded now, you may lose tracking again. So keep that in mind. They did mention in one of the classes, which was about porting your app into the Quest, about performance. And from a performance perspective, because obviously you don't have a GPU, you don't have a huge CPU like you do on a desktop, you need to try to avoid doing certain things. They mentioned avoiding changing materials and meshes. They also encourage you to use compression when creating textures. Also, bake the lighting into the scene as opposed to making it dynamic, especially when it comes to shadows. They mention reducing the number of polygons and the draw calls for your app. That's going to help in making the app perform properly. Also, merging your objects instead of having 30 objects, having 2 or 3 objects will help in the performance. The reality of the Oculus Quest versus the Rift, it's not so much about functionality because you have 6 degrees of freedom on both, but it's really about performance and graphics quality. You're going to be able to give the same features that you provide today in a Rift, but the quality of that experience may be lowered because you have a lower performing chipset on the Quest. If you want to learn more about how to develop for the Quest or how to port your app, like I mentioned before, Oculus put up a bunch of YouTube videos on their YouTube channel on the Oculus Quest. Just look for my links on the show notes. So I have a bunch of questions about the Quest itself. Number 1, will it have an SD card? No, I'm sure it won't. Question is, why not? Why can't you do that for us? My thought is, well, they just want to have different models. So it starts at $399, then can charge you more for higher end, which of course I'm going to buy the 128 or 256 gig, which means I'm going to pay more, right? So they want to make more money. Number 2 is, how are they able to sell this for $399? I'm thinking they're subsidizing this. And they're probably going to make money through the experiences, through the Oculus Store, right? Especially if this becomes a console, a game machine, then it's all about the software. And that's really where they're going to make money. The next question is, why not let me hook it up to the computer and use it for Rift experiences? I'm hoping that they change their mind or they're working on this and make that happen in the future. I just don't understand why having a Rift, especially as the capabilities of the Quest become better as time passes. I think we should be able to take the Quest, plug it into a computer through that new virtual link connector, and just let me try the super high-end Rift experiences. With Oculus Insight, because you do need all these features in the room, for example, you need corners and edges, how will it react when you have shiny surfaces? Or how will it react when there are no distinct features in the room itself? Let's say a room that's completely white. Will it still be able to track? We'll see how that works out in real life. Also, they have only mentioned tracking inside rooms, not being able to track outside. I'm thinking they're doing that from a liabilities perspective, because I just can't understand why we're not able to track outside. I'm sure many of us will try this and see what happens. And my thought is, from a liabilities perspective, right? They don't want people getting hurt. Oculus is saying, look, this is for inside use only, which it makes sense. But I have a gut feeling, and this is just me thinking out loud, that this will work outside without a problem. The other big question is battery life. How long will this last during intensive games like Robo Recall, let's say, or other VR games? This is a big question, not only for gamers, but really for people in the enterprise and using it during, let's say, a training session. So for example, if you have trainers that go on site and they have a training class and now they want to put users for value added training, right, inside of a VR experience, how long would that battery life last? How long will it take to recharge? That's going to be really important. So these are some of the questions that I have. I'm sure you guys have a lot more questions about the Quest itself. We'll see what happens. So one thing I did want to talk about is the future of VR itself. In the day one keynote, Michael Abrash, I think that's how you pronounce it, or Abrash, I'm not sure. He's the chief scientist at Oculus. He brought up a lot of really cool things. For example, it would be great to start adding eye tracking. So we're able not just to do head movement, but just move your eyes and be able to track it. What about pass-through view, kind of like the Vive Pro that has cameras, to bring in AR into our VR? The other two things that he was talking about, which I think are super exciting, is variable focus and foveated rendering, dynamic, both of them dynamic. Dynamic variable focus means that, just like in real life, if you put your finger in front of your eye it'll be in full focus, that finger, but everything behind it will be out of focus. That's how we see, right? We don't see everything 100% in deep focus. Being able to do that, and that has to work with eye tracking, right? When I move my eye and I look at something closer in VR, that should be in full focus, but everything behind it should not be in focus. The other one is dynamic foveated rendering. Right now, the Oculus Go has fixed foveated rendering, which means that when you look dead center, that's fully rendered, high resolution, and everything around it has lower resolution rendering because your eyes can't see that well anyway beyond that focus you have that you're looking at. But that's a static foveated rendering, meaning it's always in the middle. Dynamic foveated rendering is, it doesn't matter where you're looking. If you look at top right, without moving your head, you're just moving your eye top right. Of course, it has to go with eye tracking. But when you're looking at the top right, that is in full resolution, and everything around it, because you can't see real well to the peripheral sides of those, it'll be lower resolution. So that's going to be really cool. The other thing that he mentioned, which is super cool, is not just having touch controls, but being able to use your hands with your fingers to be able to flicker something, let's say using your index finger, or grabbing something using your index and thumb in virtual reality. So for example, they're doing something like that using the Magic Leap, right? You can do that with Magic Leap today, but being able to incorporate that into the Oculus Insight would be super cool. Mapping the real world and bring it into VR, so reverse AR. AR lets you take the real world and add virtual objects to it, but mapping the real world, bring it into VR, and having part of reality in VR would be super cool. Also, this would allow you to have the Void-like experiences. If you've tried the Void, you're able to play in VR, but when you touch a wall in VR or you sit down in a chair in VR, you're actually sitting down in a real chair or touching a real wall. Imagine taking the Quest, being able to map it completely and all the objects in there, and now those objects are mapped to your virtual reality scene. That would be completely awesome, which that's called mixed reality. I believe that's really the future of VR. I don't think 10 years from now we're going to call it VR or AR. It's just going to be mixed reality, sort of this hyper reality. And I know this will scare some of you guys. I personally find this exciting. But we're going to have this hyper reality where it'll be hard to tell the difference between what is real and what is fake. Which brings me to virtual humans. And this was another cool thing. They showed some virtual humans like avatars that were identical to the real person. And on top of that, they used artificial intelligence to learn about you, so then they can continue being sort of your representative. So yes, scary, but super cool as well. And then true haptics, where you get to feel. That would be the ultimate in VR. That would really close the entire loop, where not only can you move with 6 degrees of freedom, have complete hand presence, but then feel when you touch something. That would just make virtual reality almost real. So that's pretty much a wrap up of everything I personally know and the research I've done in Oculus Connect attending there. The future is definitely awesome for VR. I'm just super glad I'm playing a small part here in it, helping get people into VR and understanding that really VR is truly the future of computing. This is where we're headed. So I don't know about you, but I'm super excited about the Quest, and I can't wait till spring 2019 arrives here super quickly. Because I'm going to be one of those crazy guys, you know, the ones that you see in line at Best Buy or wherever the night before. Normally, I don't do that stuff, but for this, I'm going to be there with my tent and probably my Oculus Go. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode and learning more about the Oculus Quest. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, leave a comment, and like us on iTunes or SoundCloud. If you do want more episodes, check out howtocreatevr.com/iTunes or howtocreatevr.com/SoundCloud. If you like to watch video interviews and how-to tutorials all about immersive technologies, please subscribe to my YouTube channel at howtocreatevr.com/YouTube. If you are ever in the Southern California area, we have a monthly meetup with lots of great VR and AR presentations. You can join or RSVP for our next meetup at howtocreatevr.com/meetup. Finally, if you are interested in learning more about how to create VR, AR, or MR experiences, please visit howtocreatevr.com. So until the next episode, I'm Marcelo Lewin. Cheers, everyone.